I've spent the last several years doing something that most doctors would consider professionally embarrassing. I personally followed every major popular diet, one after another. I tracked my blood work before and after each one. I monitored my energy, my sleep, my body composition, my cognitive function. I took notes on what was sustainable, what was miserable, what actually worked, and what was pure marketing wrapped in pseudoscience. I did this so you don't have to. I'm Dr. Julian Cross, and today I'm going to give you my honest, unfiltered verdict on every major diet, what the science says, what my personal experience showed, and the one thing that almost all of them get right that nobody talks about. Let's go. Before I get into the specific diets, let me give you the framework I use to evaluate each one. Because not all diets fail for the same reason, and not all diets succeed for the same reason. I looked at four things. First, does it actually produce fat loss? And is that loss sustainable beyond 6 months? Second, what does it do to metabolic health markers? Blood sugar, insulin, inflammation, cholesterol. Third, is it something a real human being can actually maintain long-term without it consuming their entire life? And fourth, what does the peer-reviewed science actually say, separate from what the advocates claim? With that framework, let's start. The first diet I followed was the one that started the modern low-fat craze, the traditional low-fat diet. This was the dominant dietary advice for about 40 years. Eat less fat, especially saturated fat, fill up on carbohydrates, choose low-fat versions of everything. I followed this for 8 weeks. High carbohydrate, very low fat, lean proteins. Lots of whole grains, pasta, rice, bread, the standard food pyramid stuff. Here's what happened. The first 2 weeks, nothing dramatic. By week 4, I was hungry constantly. Not slightly hungry, genuinely hungry within an hour of eating. My energy was inconsistent. I had a distinct afternoon energy crash every single day around 2 p.m. My blood work at 8 weeks showed elevated fasting insulin compared to my baseline. My triglycerides had gone up. My HDL, the protective cholesterol, had gone down. Here's the science. Fat is satiating. When you remove fat from food, you need to replace the calories and flavor with something. That something is almost always refined carbohydrates and sugar. Low-fat yogurt, low-fat crackers, low-fat dressings loaded with sugar. The large-scale Women's Health Initiative study, one of the biggest dietary trials ever conducted, followed nearly 50,000 women on a low-fat diet for 8 years and found no significant reduction in heart disease, no significant weight loss advantage, and no improvement in cancer rates compared to the control group. The low-fat hypothesis was based on flawed research from the 1950s and 60s. The food industry loved it because replacing fat with cheap refined carbohydrates was enormously profitable, and it made an entire generation fatter and more insulin resistant. Verdict: doesn't work. The science doesn't support it. Move on. The second diet I tried was the one that flipped low fat completely on its head, the ketogenic diet. Very high fat, moderate protein, almost zero carbohydrates, under 20 to 30 grams per day. The goal is to deprive the body of glucose so completely that it shifts to burning fat for fuel in a metabolic state called ketosis. I followed strict keto for 10 weeks. And I want to be honest with you because most keto content is either rabidly evangelical or aggressively dismissive. The first week was rough. The keto flu is real. Fatigue, headaches, brain fog, irritability. Your body is essentially switching fuel systems and it's uncomfortable. By week 3, the transformation was genuinely striking. My energy stabilized completely. The afternoon crash I'd had on low fat, gone. My mental clarity was the sharpest it had been in years. My hunger significantly decreased. I was eating less without trying. My blood work was interesting. Fasting insulin dropped substantially. Blood glucose dropped. Triglycerides dropped dramatically. HDL went up. However, my LDL cholesterol increased. For most people, this is the LDL particle size shift from small dense to large fluffy, which is considered less dangerous. But it's a variable worth monitoring. Fat loss was significant. About 11 pounds in 10 weeks, with muscle mass preserved. The problems. Strict keto is socially brutal. Eating out is difficult. Social meals become complicated. And for many people, adherence beyond 3 to 6 months is very low. The research reflects this. Keto produces excellent short-term results, but long-term adherence is poor for most people. Verdict: genuinely effective for fat loss and metabolic health in the short to medium term. Very difficult to sustain long-term. Works best as a metabolic reset rather than a permanent lifestyle for most people. The third diet I followed has been practiced for thousands of years and has more quality research behind it than almost any other eating pattern: the Mediterranean diet. Abundant vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, olive oil, fish, nuts, and seeds. Moderate dairy. Limited red meat, Wine in moderation, traditionally with meals. I followed this for 12 weeks, and honestly, this was the easiest diet I followed. Not because it required no discipline, but because the food was genuinely good, satisfying, varied. The olive oil and fish kept me full. The vegetables were diverse enough to prevent boredom. Energy was consistently high and stable throughout, no crashes. Sleep quality improved. My digestion was noticeably better, which makes sense given the high fiber intake from legumes and vegetables. Blood work was strong. Inflammation markers, specifically high sensitivity CRP, dropped significantly. HDL improved. LDL shifted to a favorable pattern. Fasting glucose and insulin were healthy and stable. And here's the critical thing. The long-term research on the Mediterranean diet is exceptional. The Predimed trial, one of the most rigorous dietary trials ever conducted, showed a 30% reduction in major cardiovascular events in high-risk patients following a Mediterranean diet compared to a control group. It's also associated with reduced risk of cognitive decline, depression, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. Verdict: the most evidence-backed diet in existence. Sustainable, enjoyable, and genuinely protective across multiple health outcomes. This is the one I recommend most often as a long-term eating pattern. The fourth diet I followed has an almost religious following online: intermittent fasting, specifically the 16-8 protocol, eating within an 8-hour window, fasting for 16 hours. I want to be clear, intermittent fasting is an eating pattern, not a diet. You're controlling when you eat, not specifically what you eat. But because it dramatically affects metabolism, it deserves its own evaluation. I followed 16-8 for 8 weeks, eating window from noon to 8 p.m., black coffee and water in the morning. The first week was an adjustment. I was conditioned to eat breakfast, and the hunger in the morning was real. But it diminished significantly by week 2. By week 3, I wasn't hungry in the morning at all. What I noticed: mental clarity in the fasted morning state was excellent. There's a reason for this. During fasting, the body increases norepinephrine and produces ketones even without being fully ketogenic. Both sharpen cognitive function. Fat loss occurred, approximately 7 pounds over 8 weeks without any specific dietary restrictions during the eating window. Though I naturally ate less because I had fewer hours to eat. Blood work showed improved fasting insulin and improved metabolic flexibility. The main caveat: intermittent fasting works partly because it creates a caloric deficit by restricting eating time. If you eat a terrible diet in your 8-hour window, the benefits are blunted. It's most powerful when combined with quality food choices. Verdict: highly effective tool, particularly for metabolic health and simplicity. It removes the decision fatigue of counting calories. Sustainable for many people because it's a timing change, not a food restriction. The fifth diet I tried is the most extreme one on this list: the carnivore diet, meat only, zero plant foods. I followed this for 6 weeks, and I'll be honest, I was deeply skeptical going in. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner: beef, eggs, some fish, some organ meats, nothing else. No vegetables, no fruit, no grains, no dairy for most of it. What I experienced: the first 2 weeks were similar to keto adaptation. Fatigue, digestive adjustment, headaches. My digestion changed dramatically as my gut microbiome shifted. By week 3, something I didn't expect: certain low-grade inflammatory symptoms I've been living with, some mild joint stiffness, occasional skin irritation, improved noticeably. Proponents of carnivore argue this is because plant anti-nutrients and certain compounds like oxalates and lectins drive inflammation in susceptible people. Energy was stable, mental clarity was high, hunger was low, protein and fat are extremely satiating, fat loss was significant. But I also lost some lean mass, which concerned me. The science on carnivore long-term is essentially non-existent. We have no large-scale long-term studies. We have anecdotes, many compelling ones. But anecdotes are not evidence. My concerns: no fiber means significant gut microbiome changes whose long-term implications we don't understand. No phytonutrients, the thousands of plant compounds with anti-inflammatory and protective effects that appear consistently in the research. And it's extremely restrictive socially. Verdict: may have therapeutic applications for specific inflammatory or autoimmune conditions. As a permanent lifestyle for a generally healthy person, the risk-benefit ratio is unclear, and the long-term data simply doesn't exist yet. The sixth eating pattern I evaluated is one most people don't think of as a diet: the standard Western diet. The default: processed food, fast food, high sugar, high refined carbohydrates, high sodium, low fiber, low micronutrients. I didn't follow this deliberately, but I spent time reviewing the research on what it does to the body over years and decades. It is the most studied diet in the world because it's what the majority of people in developed countries eat. and the research is unambiguous and devastating. The standard Western diet is directly associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, chronic inflammation, cognitive decline, depression, and multiple forms of cancer. It's not one of those things where the evidence is mixed. It's one of the most consistently replicated findings in nutritional epidemiology. Verdict: the worst thing you can eat. And it's the default. It requires active effort to avoid it because it's cheaper, more convenient, more heavily marketed, and more engineered for overconsumption than anything else available. So after all of that, what did I actually learn? Here's the most important thing I discovered, and this cuts across every diet I followed. The diets that worked, keto, Mediterranean, intermittent fasting, all shared one thing that had nothing to do with their specific rules. They all dramatically reduced ultra-processed food. Keto eliminates most processed food because processed food is full of carbs. Mediterranean emphasizes whole, minimally processed food by design. Intermittent fasting reduces total food intake and naturally crowds out mindless processed snacking. The common thread isn't low fat or low carb or high fat or any macronutrient ratio. It's real food versus processed food. The research supports this completely. A landmark 2019 study published in Cell Metabolism put participants on either an ultra-processed diet or an unprocessed diet with matched calories, sugar, fat, fiber, and macronutrients. The ultra-processed group ate on average 508 more calories per day and gained weight. The unprocessed group naturally ate less and lost weight. Same macros, completely different outcomes. Processing changes food in ways that override your body's natural satiety signals. It makes you eat more. It drives inflammation. It disrupts your gut microbiome. And none of that has anything to do with which macronutrient you're restricting. Here is my final recommendation based on everything I experienced and everything the research shows. Eat mostly whole, minimally processed food. That's the foundation. On top of that foundation, the Mediterranean pattern has the best long-term evidence and is the most sustainable for most people. If you have significant metabolic damage, insulin resistance, prediabetes, significant excess body fat, a period of keto or low carbohydrate eating can be a powerful metabolic reset before transitioning to a more moderate long-term pattern. Intermittent fasting is a useful tool that works well layered on top of any of the above. And whatever you do, move away from the ultra-processed default. That one shift, more than any specific diet, is what the evidence most consistently supports. You don't need the perfect diet. You need a good diet you can actually sustain for decades. If this gave you clarity after all the noise out there, please like this video and subscribe. I try to cut through the confusion and give you the science straight every single week. Share this with someone who's been jumping from diet to diet without results. This might be the video that finally gives them the bigger picture. I'm Dr. Julian Cross, and I'll see you in the next one.